Hey there, good people, and welcome back to the DNP podcast. I'm your host, Deb Agbadet, and I'm ready for the Super Bowl a week from Sunday. This episode will discuss the Bills promoting Joe Brady from offensive coordinator to head coach. Also, Kevin Stefanski was introduced as Falcons head coach this week, so what's the main talking point from that presser? This pod is available on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts, so like, rate, subscribe, and all that good stuff so you can stay up to date with each upload. After last week's decision to fire Sean McDermott, the Buffalo Bills said they were hoping to move on from the emotional baggage in years past from playoff losses. So they promoted their offensive coordinator to head coach, who's been with the team since 2022. Something don't feel right. And it just feels like, again, it kind of lends to what was said last week in the press conference that OC commented in on the last episode, to where you're kind of blaming the rest for the loss, but then the result of the game led to you firing Sean McDermott. And I was saying last week as well that the offense isn't the issue with Buffalo. Like, they've had, prolific offensives in the regular season, in the playoffs, going into these games that, lead to eventual heartbreak, but then they make the decision that nope, we've got to rip the band-aid off, tear it down, and bring in someone new or someone different at the top, because that's going to be what changes the fortunes for the Bills. But it just seems like promoting Joe Brady is a bit of a half measure and a bit of a he is familiar with Josh Allen. He has been with the team for a bit. We still want to maintain that certain floor, which isn't guaranteed, by the way, because you're bringing in a rookie head coach. So you're saying we need to change things, but also we kind of need to stick with what we've had in years past. But what has happened in years past isn't good enough for you because you haven't gone to that mountaintop of at least getting to a Super Bowl, let alone winning one. So it just kind of, these sorts of things that are inconsistent with what was said in the press conference before. And like I make the rookie head coach point, which doesn't guarantee that sort of ascension that the Bills are hoping for. But you look at what the Ravens did with hiring Jesse Minter, who himself is going to be in a head coaching position for the first time. But at least with Minter, his expertise is what the Ravens were lacking in the past 2 years, where you look at when Mike McDonald left and went to Seattle, obviously now they're in the Super Bowl and everything's flying for them, but his defense in Baltimore was a staunch one that was keeping teams at bay, and their playoff losses while he was coordinator were based on the offense and Lamar Jackson underperforming. And in these past couple of years as well, when they bring in Zach Orr to be defensive coordinator, and you have these abysmal starts to seasons where they kind of, little by little get better, but still not good enough. And I guess this past year, it obviously bites Baltimore in the arse. But you see what Minter's done with the Chargers defense in the past couple of years since Jim Harbaugh brought him in from Michigan. You say, okay, yeah, that is what you've been able to do with obviously you have Derwin James, you have Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa after a year. Like you're not doing it with this like Seattle's done, when you have Eamon Warren and Weatherspoon and Lawrence and Leonard Williams, and like you can list the names off on the defense and say, oh yeah, this is a really solid one, and they're performing like it. The Chargers were performing like it, but they were doing it with Dafe Owe and like guys who aren't those names don't carry as much weight, I guess, in terms of being top of the line defensive players in their position like they do elsewhere. So you're saying, okay, back onto the point of a rookie head coach being brought in and saying, yeah, they are coming in to help what we've been lacking. Joe Brady is not coming in because he's been in the organization, but he's stepping up to a head coach in the area in which they've not been lacking. They have had, they scored 30 points in this last playoff game. They did so turning the ball over an umpteenth amount of time. So you're saying, you're not really saying that, okay, the defense, which has been lacking in our playoff games, is the one we need to improve. And no, results show that that is where the Bills need to step up, in a sense, when it comes to getting over the hump in the playoffs. And they bring in, they've already announced their defense coordinator being Jim Leonard, who was defensive pass game coordinator in Denver, which I guess at least you're bringing him from a very vaunted defense that the Denver Broncos have been in the past couple of years since Sean Payton's come in. So you say, okay, fair enough. And when you look around the league in terms of defense coordinator positions, he was a name that came up a lot for the top job. So you're saying, okay, at least you've brought in that sort of new idea in that sense. But when I mentioned last week about bringing in a Brian Flores or a Robert Saleh, who, okay, they're the ones who have the cachet that you can say, yeah, this is going to bring our defense to a level to where we are satisfied. What Flores' defense works, Saleh's defense works, and that the like, and certain defensive coordinators around, I guess. Jesse Minter's defense. Well, like you know that these guys are going to come in, and there's going to be a level that a defense performs in, because that's the scheme that they've brought over, and it's worked for many successful teams in the past. So you're bringing in Jim Leonard, and cool, yes, good name, but that's not a guarantee. It's not one where, with the pieces in place, you're confident that, okay, this side of the ball is going to turn around, like a Flores and a Saleh defense would have brought to the Bills for sure. And another thing that comes to mind is that Joe Brady wasn't guaranteed to get a head coaching job elsewhere. Obviously he interviewed with the Ravens, he interviewed with the Falcons and the Raiders and the like, but those teams all had chances to bring in Joe Brady, and especially the Raid beforehand. There are opportunities to bring the guy in, and none of them did. And obviously the Bills are the ones who know him and promote him at the end of the day. But you could have brought in a Saleh, a Flores. I guess those are two names I kind of point to and say, yeah, those are the creme de la creme of defensive coaches. And they could have kept Joe Brady on as OC, and he's obviously inclined to stick around with Josh Allen because he is MVP level, and again the familiarity and the like. So he could have stayed on as OC regardless of whether you hire him and promote him as head coach or not. So I just thought, okay, they're kind of leaving themselves a little bit short in a sense when it comes to changing the ideas and changing, how Buffalo approaches playoff games, they have, had an issue with, and the reason they make the change in the first place, regarding to their years of playoff, heartbreak. So that's my thoughts on the hiring. I guess obviously Brandon Beane's someone who, as president of football operations now, who I guess you can't put any draft picks on the coaching staff now because you've even been promoted and have a greater level of power within the organization. So, acquire the right pieces on defense, acquire, the right receivers. So Khalil Shakir, who's very much a, sort of guy feels it isn't really a wide receiver one for a prolific passing game, to say you've got to bring the guys in. The Patriots, they're in the Super Bowl now, so they're not going to go anywhere because Drake May's in the second year and he's fine, and Mike Vrabel's in his first year with the team, so they're not going anywhere. So the division is very much one to be, I guess you have that rival that you're going to have to pit year in, year out now. So I'm not the biggest fan of this move. I think we'll obviously have to wait and see how things turn out, but from where I sit here on, in late January, I'm not the most pleased if I would be a Bills fan for the decision to promote Joe Brady as head coach. Tuesday saw the Atlanta Falcons introduce Kevin Stefanski as the team's new head coach alongside President of Football Matt Ryan. They spoke of a new aligned vision for the team to be tough, physical, and detailed. Now I'll admit, as a Falcons fan, this brought me a bit of confidence. This brought me a bit more, I guess, belief that there are adult football people in the room making football decisions regarding the football team. And, hearing, or seeing the rapport that, Matt Ryan and Kevin Stefanski had as head coach and president of football, you say, yeah, this is clearly the guy that I wanted to bring in and the type of individual he wanted as a head coach, because he comes with experience of taking a team like the Cleveland Browns to the playoffs twice in his run since 2020. You say, he's focused on football in terms of not, taking, I guess, with the previous regime and Raheem Morris especially as the head coach, he didn't feel like, there were serious people, to be frank, at the top of, the football decision making, or at least in terms of, preparing teams for games. I remember there are times last season where, you can go into the Bills game, the Rams game, facing a team that is of the creme de la creme of the NFL, and you can G a team up to say, hey, we're gonna get the win here, and we're gonna beat these guys up, and frankly we did. But then even with those great wins on prime time, you're letting them sneak back into the game, and your levels of approach aren't as strong, or things dilly dally a little bit, and then these teams get back into the game. So those great wins even have their slights of saying, okay, the coaching isn't of the right level. But ghastly things like losing to the Dolphins by 20 when they're 1-7, going to MetLife and giving the Jets still their most recent win, because they would go on to get smashed by 20 in every game moving forward, and coming off of those games, those great games, you're having those tail offs and end of game, late game management. And look, I can't say that I look at I've looked at the Browns very closely in terms of what Stefanski's tenure was. I know obviously there's an off season to look at that and have a bit more of an idea, but one thing I do know about what the Cleveland Browns have been in the past couple of years is a team that was strapped by a horrible trade and a horrible decision, trading multiple picks, fully guaranteeing a deal to Deshaun Watson, who obviously there's a lot to be said about him off the field, but certainly on the field is not a franchise quarterback, let alone a top of the market guaranteed $50-60 million a deal quarterback, which then leads to the rest of the team being essentially, other than Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward, and top players in their positions, it's basically a team built together by scraps. And here you go from the practice squad, here you go from 5th round, 3rd round quarterbacks, and it just, I hope, obviously as a fan of a team, but also expect with the likes of Bijan Robinson, who he spoke about, Drake London. We'll see what happens with Kyle Pitts, but I would fully expect him to come back on a deal. I mean, heck, he's second team All Pro, so there's you don't let a 25-year-old tight end playing at an All Pro level walk out the door for nothing. Like, at least you wouldn't expect or see, because obviously this team still needs to hire a GM. But I guess going back onto the press conference, there's just a lot more of an idea that, okay, this guy is coming in with experience of being a head coach, which Raheem did have in terms of being the Tampa Bay Buccaneers head coach in the early 10s, but you didn't sense there was that level of, I guess, experience coming into play. And he also brings in, a rookie offensive coordinator in Zach Robinson, who I very much wasn't the biggest fan of, especially when you consider how there was just that lack of identity. And, with people from the McVay tree, which obviously Zach Robinson coming from the Rams did work under Sean McVay, who expects, that run, that run game that supports the pass game, the play action, the under center. There was minimal under center with, Penix, and then in the press conferences you mentioned that, oh, well, Penix isn't comfortable with it. Well, if you're an offensive coordinator and he comes in the offseason where he pines to draft Penix, you expect that you'd, make sure that you're acquiring a quarterback that is comfortable with the under center game. So you completely ignore it when Penix is in, but then when Cousins comes in, that's when you incorporate it a little more. And it just seems like, you could sense the lack of experience and the rookie coordinatorship that Zach Robinson was. You also bring in Jimmy Lake initially as a rookie defensive coordinator, to where, that first season starts off 6-3 and then you tail off at the end of it. So, one thing that, at least with Stefanski and the staff that he has built up, is that, okay, he's bringing over Tommy Rees from Cleveland, who, was the coordinator with him there and is going to be the play caller here. We'll see how that thing develops. But he retained Jeff Ulbrich, who, again, last year with the sacks, last year with... You didn't feel like the defense was losing you games. You felt that it was a stalling offense that kept the defense on for large periods of time and then getting picked apart after, the offense on their side aren't able to maintain drives. You bring in Craig Ockerman, a special teams coordinator. That was a big point that, bit the Falcons at the end, of Raheem's tenure, that our special teams was one of, if not the worst in the league, especially leading the league in kick yards on kicks returned against. I'm sure there's a better way to say that, but in terms of kickoffs, we allowed the most return yards. Maintaining that special teams coordinator and that special teams being, among the pits of the NFL is one that, why did you keep him around for so long? Why you eliminated with a month to go in a division with a 8-win champion? There are just so many things that from the previous tenure that you have to look at and say, yeah, they had to go, and things that look to be amended with this new coaching staff. And I think that is one where I can look into it and go into next season and say, okay, yeah, I feel a little bit more confident that there are adults in the room making the decisions based on things that they have experienced in the past. Another thing that I think was big from what Stefanski said in the press conference is that he's clearly a fan of Michael Penix. And when you look at how the Falcons are discussed generally among NFL fandom, among NFL media, there is this idea and this thought process that the Falcons are without a quarterback, or their franchise quarterback isn't in place, that the people in place or people on the roster right now haven't got the capability to be the franchise quarterback. And I categorically disagree with that notion, because the issues with Michael Penix aren't the on the field play, that he's not able to read a defense, he's not able to make the progressions necessary, he's not able to scramble, he's immobile, this and that and the other. He is, when on the field, and I think that's the concern there, which is valid, but when he's on the field, I've seen him go toe-to-toe with Drake May, who's now in the Super Bowl, and miss because the kicker misses an extra point, or he's going toe-to-toe with Jaden Daniels and doesn't get the ball in overtime. I've seen, obviously all of his NFL career, and I'm seeing a quarterback that is very much capable of being that franchise guy and being someone who can, take a team far with the right pieces around him. Like, he's not, a Mahomes and Allen. I'm not trying to claim that he's a creme de la creme, but I'm saying that he very much can be in that 16 to 10 out of the 32 starting quarterbacks range to say that, yeah, Michael Penix is not hurting a team by his play. The coaching wasn't to the best of their ability to, help him come into the league smoothly, but on the field, he is capable of playing at a certain level. He's had good moments in his NFL career. The big concern, which again is a valid concern, is the knees, the ACL injuries that he suffered in college and has now suffered in the NFL, and the facts that Stefanski comes in and doesn't kind of ignore the questions about the quarterback room, or it kind of just says, oh, Penix is all right, like, I like him. Like, he kind of went into detail to say, yep, from the tape I've watched, from what I've seen, clearly he's excited to work with him, and he mentions that he's someone that he's looking forward to take moving forward with as Atlanta Falcons head coach and his quarterback. So yeah, I'm sure you can tell, I'm excited and I'm hopeful, which I think is the big thing. It's sort of have to have that cautious optimism, because I've come into years. I know last year I predicted the team to win the division with my division predictions, and turns out we finished third. So tied for third, sure, if you want to claim it, which obviously sends the Panthers to the playoffs. Hip hip hooray for them. But no, it's very much a press conference that I sat down and watched and said, okay, yeah, there's an adult that is sitting up there and saying, yeah, I'm going to take this roster to where it should be. And I'm kind of looking forward to what's to come for the Falcons in the 26th season. Alright, this section is going to be short because, this would usually be like the pick six or the prediction part of the show, and obviously there's only one game to predict now, so I guess, and like that's next Sunday, so I'm not going to give you guys my Super Bowl prediction and then just leave next week's segment bare. So next week you'll see my Super Bowl prediction. Obviously, when it came to my overall playoff bracket predictor, I had a certain team that's in the Super Bowl that was going to win the thing. Things can change. Things, over the course of the playoffs, what I've seen, whatever, can lead to me not saying the Seahawks are going to beat the Patriots, but I'll at least give myself the week to fully analyze and assess what things are in place are for my Super Bowl prediction. What I will say, and what I will pat myself on the back for, is that my NFC bracket was perfect. The wild card, the divisional, the NFC Championship game, bang, 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 boom. Eagles winning. Sorry, the Niners beating the Eagles, the Bears beating the Packers, the Rams beating the Panthers, then the Rams beating the Bears, Seahawks, Niners. You know how things shaked out, because I knew how things shaked out before the playoffs even started. So again, pat myself on the back for that one. But yeah, next week comes the Super Bowl prediction. Next week's Super Bowl, can't wait for it. Obviously, the way this past weekend's games went, you'd obviously say to the Broncos that there's an element of what could have been, with Bo Nix fracturing his ankle in the divisional against the Bills. Jared Stidham doesn't kind of, I don't want to say go ballistic, because that was definitely a case of Sean Payton telling him, like, okay, let's let this thing rip, because what else do we have to lose, right? Because it's in the snow. We've only got so much time left. We're down 3. The kickers haven't been able to make field goals in ages, so let's try and score this one on the field, and tries to make a big play, ends up getting picks. Drake May, who ran really well throughout the game, so that's obviously something to consider for Super Bowl, his ability to make plays with his legs. But honestly, yeah, what a playoffs we've had so far, and what a way it's going to end with, you know, a really good Super Bowl. We're not seeing Jarrett Stidham in Super Bowl, yes, thankfully. We're going to see, good weather as another thing when it comes to the weather in Santa Clara as opposed to weather in Denver, which was yeah. I see why, from an entertainment perspective, because see the owners see this as entertainment. In all honesty, a good TV show, and the viewing experience for that game wasn't to the top mark, you'd say, because it was 10-7 and there was just run. No, yeah, 3 and outs, 3 runs, just nothing happening in that second half when the blizzard came in. So you see why the owners are looking to bring in more domes, so that that snow, in essence, doesn't have the impacts that you'd saw last weekend in those games. But yeah, Super Bowl next week. Can't wait. Look forward to it. And yeah, thankful for the NFL season we've had so far. Obviously, starting a podcast, not easy, but we get things done. And to thank everyone for tuning in, because that's the episode. So yeah, again, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being episode 25. That's a milestone right there. I'll obviously look back at this one fondly. And yeah, hope everyone has a good week off football going into the Super Bowl. Like, rate, subscribe, watch all the other talking points from weeks past in terms of the podcast, and yeah, I'd like to see you all next week when it's Super Bowl week. So yep, like, rate, subscribe, all that good stuff. 6 up to date with each upload. Bye bye.